One of Indywood's favourite children, Jim Jarmusch, is back with his first fictional film since 2013's ever so slightly surreal Only Lovers Left Alive, a tale of vampire love quite unlike the Twilight Saga. So Paterson, which releases in the UK on DVD and Blu-ray on the 27th of March, centres on a week in the life of a bus driver called Paterson who, rather curiously, lives in a town of the same name. He also happens to be a talented, if slightly reluctant, poet. There's not much more to say of the plot than that, but that's not necessarily an issue. And the film itself was actually initially in the running for an Oscar, or an Oscar nomination, but the hype seemed to die down slightly after its Palme d'Or nomination at Cannes back in May. Indeed, it didn't perform particularly well at the box office and actually enjoyed quite a limited run in the UK. And that's a real pity, given that for me it was by far a superior film to the Oscar Best Picture winning Moonlight. Hopefully it'll have a second lease of life with this home release. So I won't claim to be an expert on a director who I know receives a lot of love. My only prior experience of his films was from Broken Flowers, but many of the qualities that I distilled from that film were present in Paterson too. It's similarly gentle, comic, and a sort of a profile of an individual. And the sense of tone is really vital to this film's success. Indeed, it's a sense of sort of gentility which is perhaps Paterson's most distinctive feature. Adam Driver plays Paterson, and unlike his eccentric role as Kylo Ren in the Behemoth Star Wars The Force Awakens, he's returned to the kind of performance that saw him gain recognition from the Coen brothers and Martin Scorsese, among others. It's the Adam Driver that you saw in Frances Ha and Tracks. His acting is very much subdued, and that's a necessary trait when portraying a character who spends his life adhering to a very strict routine. It's a pity that he didn't come into awards contention, because sometimes restraint can be just as effective as sort of an overblown dramatic one. And in many ways the film actually serves to reflect the psyche of small-town America. It's slow and it's steady, but Paterson is satisfied with his lot. His sense of routine doesn't allow for much adventure, but or at least the week-long slice of it that we actually see. But he does have one source of expression, and that is that Paterson loves his poetry, to read it and to write it. And on the face of it, that's got the potential to verge into the kind of pretentious territory and detract from what might otherwise be quite an accessible film. But thankfully that isn't the case. The poems are actually neatly interwoven into the film, and they're occasionally quite amusing. Whether that's intentional or not, it's quite hard to say, but then I suppose I'm just not very clever. So for me, the most engaging moments were the glimpses of comedy. I love Mike Leigh's films because, like Paterson, they've got quite a sort of warm sense of humour that's true to that of life itself. And whilst Paterson himself is never particularly amusing, even if he is quite a likeable protagonist, some of the sort of characters or figures around him are. His girlfriend is sort of obsessed with black and white patterns and sort of short-term obsessions like learning to play the guitar and with baking cupcakes, which is worth saying she's not particularly bad at when she tries her hand at it, but it is amusing how she sort of flicks between these various interests. And Paterson himself seemingly only seems to sort of put up with these somewhat trying ways because of the strength of his affection for her, which is certainly not in doubt, even if he does sort of look somewhat bewildered at times, because most of the poetry he spends his time writing is generally aimed at her. So, Paterson also features one of the best canine performances on film. It's up there with The Artist, I would say, in that regard. And indeed, Nellie the dog rightfully picked up the greatest accolade in the world of dog acting, the Palme Dog. Often the dog expresses the things that Paterson surely wishes he could say. He sort of groans and growls, and it's often quite amusing. And I would go so far to say as he's probably responsible for the film's most amusing and at the same time sad moment, but I won't spoil that one. The bus driving scenes in the film, they had the potential to be a real bore, but thankfully the director turns those into sort of artful interludes. Within those, Paterson's listening into passengers' conversations, and the audience is sort of shared into that eavesdropping. And On the bus and elsewhere, he encounters a number of sets of twins. Whilst I'm not quite sure what the real or artistic cause of this motif was, I sort of read it as a further reflection on the kind of lack of variety in this town, this small town in America. That's my motif for this review, I think. Overall, it is quite nice to see a film about normal people for once, but it has to be said that is as much its strength as it is its weakness. It toys with your expectations, and one often assumes that Paterson's pleasant life will implode. But no, things do stay as they are. And actually, I think that's quite refreshing. It's a simple, pleasant watch that's difficult to dislike, and the result of that is, whilst it's certainly not groundbreaking or overly entertaining, I kind of feel like that was the film's intention. A film about mundane life should necessarily avoid the spectacular. So yeah, Paterson is far from being a thriller, but sometimes that's just fine. And for me, it's an 8 out of 10.